Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help you trust the products you depend on. As you know, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you think about drugs, wonder about devices, consider cannabis, or obsess over pharmacy, this is the podcast for you. I have to say, I'm an attorney, but I'm not your attorney. I'm a pharmacist, but I'm not your pharmacist. So this is not legal advice, it's not clinical advice. I do love these podcasts, these live streams, because they're a lot of fun, and I find myself learning something new every single time. But it would be good to know if someone's listening. So if you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe. If you have questions, please ask the questions while we're having a conversation. And if you like the conversation itself, please share it. We would appreciate that. If you want to find me, please reach out to me on Twitter at Darshan Talks, or just go to our website, darshantalks.com. Our podcast today is fun as always. We've had our guest on before. He is the executive director at the Heart Valve Voice US, and he is, shall we say, a very prolific speaker. And he has, and he apparently has spent the weekend working on his backyard, which he does not want to talk about. Which I think we all had that weekend where we just sort of went, this is the last hurrah of summer, and none of us want to look at our laptops. And it sounds like some of us actually did something productive. So kudos. Our guest for today, like I mentioned, is the executive director at the Heart Valve Voice US, which I'm going to ask him more about. John Lewis. Hey, John, how are you?
I'm great, Darshan. How are you?
I am well. I'm dealing with a little bit of a weird throat thing, but a little itchiness. Hopefully, it's just a passing thing, but nothing too bad. You, on the other hand, have been busy and have been busy in a few different things. So, when we spoke, you talked a little bit about the idea of getting insurance policies and getting all sort of your organization set up and ready. Um, which we had a very brief discussion about, which was the idea that as someone who's advocating for patients, you're only doing good, and who's suing people who are doing good? And I say that in a lawyer, and I kind of go, yeah, I shouldn't be saying that. None of that makes sense. So John, tell us a little bit about, first of all, the Heart Valve Voice US. Tell us a little bit about where are the areas you find vulnerabilities in, and how do you decide which insurances you're going to get? And let's kind of go from there.
Sure. Heart Valve Voice US is a patient advocacy organization supporting, obviously, patients with heart valve disease. We are um, trying to extend that a little bit into patients that may have other, what are commonly referred to as structural heart issues. So what we find is that people with heart valve disease frequently experience things like AFib or other um, uh, heart diseases like that or associated with the valves or that affect the valves. So we run a patient community called My Valve, My Voice. So patients can interact with each other, share their experiences. We provide a lot of resources there. We are in the process of um, revamping the resources we provide. What we've tried to do is curate a best of set of resources from many different of our partners, from Mended Hearts, the American Heart Association, others that we interact with, professional medical societies that have information on heart valve disease to make it easy for patients when they're searching for information, whether it is symptoms or treatment options or aftercare, um, to be able to find those rather than looking at a list of 300 different links on a search. So we're in the process of doing that to support patients. We also get so that's one area, kind of the awareness of the disease and supporting the communities, patient communities, and related communities is one big bucket for us. Another bucket is in the policy area where we engage in policies that affect the access to and reimbursement for and approval of various heart valve treatments, and that may be through CMS, through Medicare, because many heart valve patients tend to be Medicare beneficiaries. They tend to be older. or through private insurers. We just saw recently, for instance, where Anthem, one of the larger uh, Blue Cross Blue Shield providers, I think they're in 13 states, recently revised its policies to come more in line with the other private insurers in terms of their coverage of transcatheter aortic valve replacement, or TAVR or TAVI, that it's called, to fall more in line. And we had encouraged them, let's say that, advocated to them to do so. So we're active on the policy side, and we have some plans for next year that I don't want to get into too much, but we think there's a real opportunity to uh, improve the detection of heart valve. And then, kind of a third area that we focus on is in the area of research and providing access to patients and research services. So it may be in our case, generally a medical device company. It could be a pharmaceutical company, but generally a medical device company that may want a patient to play an advisor on their clinical trial, or to have input into the design of that clinical trial. There may be companies that want to do uh, patient surveys or patient preference surveys, and we can go out to our patient community and promote those surveys. And then we are venturing into the area of clinical trial recruitment and trying to speed up that process and facilitate that process. It's very difficult. It's very difficult in a lot of areas. It's particularly difficult in the area of heart valve disease. And we think with the credibility we've established, with the patient community we've built and the outreach we've done, we can be an effective partner to responsibly help recruit patients and spread awareness about clinical trial opportunities. So those are kind of the three buckets in which we generally operate.
So it sounds like you have a pretty wide net. What I found interesting is something you said pretty early on, where you said you're actually expanding the scope. It's not just about the heart valve voice anymore. It's about structural defects. You talked a little bit about atrial fibrillation, AFib, if you will. My question to you is, when you are a nonprofit, how do you make that decision as to our scope's too narrow or we want to expand the scope? How is that decision made? Is it more of a we just asked our board and that's where we're going, or you're sort of trending something, you're asking people, or how does that conversation happen?
Yeah, it's really more, I guess if you looked at it from a marketing sense, it would be kind of following the trends. But when we look at our patient population, who often have multiple conditions, when we look at the uh, the funders, our funders on the corporate side of business, they have heart valve businesses, but they're usually encased within larger structural heart business units that deal with other issues around the heart in addition to heart valves. And so, looking at it from both sides, it's how can we best serve that patient community, and how can we attract the funding for that patient community. And then when we look at things like screening for heart valve disease, the screening generally would be after you've had, say, a stethoscope check that's detected a murmur or some irregularity with your heart. Maybe it's your family physician or a cardiologist. You would probably go for an echocardiogram, and we can't we can't know at this point whether that echocardiogram is going to show a heart valve issue or some other related issue. So it's really just kind of a practical decision about the pathway for that patient, and making sure that they get the best diagnosis and care they can get. And we have no interest in changing our name. We are Heart Valve Voice, and we want to spread awareness about the symptoms of heart valve disease and the treatment options for heart valve disease. But the reality is that many patients, that the symptoms of heart valve disease can mirror the symptoms of many other diseases and of the heart, and dizziness, lack of energy. Some people just feel like they're getting older, and we're trying to knock down that myth and really encourage people to explore those symptoms and get a proper diagnosis. So it may or may not be heart valve disease. Oftentimes it may be, but it may be some other structural heart problem. So that's kind of how we're. It's a very subtle uh, uh, addition. I won't say change of direction, but kind of expansion that we're going through.
So it's interesting. You talk about this idea that, and correct me if I'm wrong. What I'm hearing you say is heart valve disease is a diagnosis, and that's great, and you're helping those people. However, they don't find out that diagnosis until further along the process. What you're trying to do is help people a little earlier on the process, so that if it's the heart valve disease, great, you help them anyways. There are other structural differences, and you might be able to help those patients as well in that pathway. Is that accurate?
Exactly. So I think the subtle change would be we can say, hey, you need to go get checked for heart valve disease. Well, that may be true, but what we really want to say is you need to get properly diagnosed. It may be heart valve disease, or it may be something else. So it's just a very subtle change, because we can't um, we can't diagnose patients. Certainly, we can't, as a patient advocacy organization, remotely or through a chat or a patient community or a Facebook page. We need to. They need to actually consult with their doctors, and we want to encourage them to do that. We want to make them aware that heart valve disease um, could be what they're encountering, but it could be other things as well. So we want to encourage them to pursue the diagnosis and the screening um, for whatever may be bothering them. And if it ends up being heart valve disease, then we've got the right approach
Absolutely.
for them. But yes.
So, John, right now you have a bunch of different advisors. Do you find that the advisors you work with will have to change over time to reflect this additional scope?
Uh, I don't think so. Again, the other structural heart diseases are so closely related. There are um, from the clinician side of it, from the whether it's an interventional cardiologist or a thoracic surgeon, or cardiac surgeon, the treatments may um, they deal in treatments for heart valves and other structural heart issues generally. So it's really um, um, again, looking at the patient, looking at the device manufacturers, looking at the clinicians. These are very related kind of uh, topics. So it's not it's a I don't know. I guess in marketing terms, maybe you call it a brand extension. Maybe it's not even that much, but it's just kind of dealing with the reality of the patient population we're engaging with. That they may have heart valve disease, they may have something that looks like heart valve disease, um, they may have multiple conditions that that look like that have similar symptoms that require similar treatments or intervention.
While we're talking, as you can tell, I pulled up a copy of your website, and I just kind of think it is such an interesting descriptor of sort of where heart valve disease is going. And one of the things you talk about is this idea of resources for doctors and patients during the COVID-19 pandemic. Have you found that there has been a drop in diagnoses for patients during this time? And are you seeing a rebound right now, or is that rebound not there yet?
Yeah, it's it's interesting. So there's been a lot of research done on this, not necessarily particular. And by the way, we're in the midst of a revamp of the website. So that will next time we talk, hopefully we'll talk again. That will look different. The and these things are always take more time and are more difficult than you think. And I've been through it so many times now. The There's been a lot of research done over the last year or so on the effect of the pandemic that um, we've seen. We've seen less visits to the doctor. Something came out, I think, this morning from one of the large insurers, um, that they're starting to see a drop off in claims again. People just not going to the doctor for whatever. Then we have um, some research that has been done that has shown fewer people have gone or were going for all types of imaging, ultrasounds, echocardiograms, etc. Which is so if you look at this as a funnel where a person would first go to maybe their general practitioner or maybe their cardiologist because they're having some symptoms, then they would be referred to some type of imaging for further diagnosis, and then possibly for eventual treatment, surgical intervention, a transcatheter procedure in the case of heart valves, um, and a drop off there. So I think what we had seen, and there's data that supports this, what we had seen was um, the number of procedures and the number of um, screening exams were back up to pre-COVID levels, uh, maybe 6 months ago or so. We're starting to get back up there. Once the vaccines were introduced, and the elderly population in particular, those over 65 have, I think, an 80% plus vaccination rate at this point. So they were really getting back into their care. Then, just in the last month or 2 months with the Delta variant, that has backed up hospitals again and filled ICUs again and put another pause on elective procedures. So now we're going backwards and seeing a number of procedures that were scheduled, and a number of appointments that were scheduled now being rescheduled or delayed or canceled again. And we had run a campaign through from February through July, called Just Go, where we were encouraging patients who had missed appointments, who had missed procedures because of COVID, to make sure they re-engaged with their doctors, um, with their cardiologists and other providers, to make sure they were going to reschedule those procedures and reschedule those appointments so that they could stay in that 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 treatment journey. And it was a very successful campaign, and we hoped we hoped it was over, and now we don't know if we're going to have to run it again next year, but or run some other type of campaign. So that's been discouraging. That we kind of thought we were getting back to normal levels, and the people who had procedures, particularly those who had already been diagnosed and had procedures canceled, were getting back into their treatment and getting those procedures scheduled, and now maybe bumped again. So that's discouraging.
So I do find it interesting that you talk about having to rerun the same campaign to bring awareness to the situation. I guess one of the things that sort of jumped out at me, as you can see on the screen right now, is this idea that you were responding to essentially commenting on a proposal from CMS, and you were advocating for your patients. Do you have the opportunity? Do you guys engage with other advocacy groups or with the government to actually get funding for these types of outreach efforts? And how does the government or other groups sort of deal with that? Do they kind of go, look, we put money down this path already. We're not interested in going down this again, or is it's an important issue and we kind of want to encourage that?
Yeah, that's difficult because obviously every uh, disease organization, every advocacy group, every patient group would wants more funding for their particular disease. Getting government funding for that, or government funding for awareness campaigns is 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 difficult. We have not pursued that in any large way. We have worked with the National Institutes of Health with to on events to raise awareness, but not on major campaigns. So that's not a path we have taken. We do regularly engage with a number of other advocacy groups. We manage something called the Heart Valve Disease Policy Task Force, where we collectively look at things like you were just referencing on our website, CMS policies around uh, new treatments for mitral valve disease or aortic valve disease, and soon we'll be seeing new treatments for tricuspid valve disease coming through the FDA approval process and into the Medicare payment stream. So there is that opportunity, and we are looking at ways to possibly, kind of formalize this task force a little more. But there's certainly opportunities there. We also have very cooperative relationships with a number of organizations where we try to amplify each other's messages, whether it's through social media, whether it's through podcasts, whether it's through videos and sharing information. So, we're involved now with an effort with the American Heart Association on a campaign they're running on aortic stenosis, where we're trying to amplify that message. We have every year in February there is Heart Valve Disease Awareness Day that's run by one of our partners, the Alliance for Aging Research, that gets involved in a lot of other disease areas, but heart valve disease is one of them that we work closely with them on that initiative, which they started before or around the time Heart Valve Voice was forming. So they've been on that issue for a while, and we want to support that any way we can. We have a group of international partners that we work with through um, through the um, heart. I'm losing the name. We have a group of international collaborators we work with as well. There is a Heart Valve Voice in the UK. There's a Heart Valve Voice in Canada, in Japan, in other countries, and other disease and other groups that focus on heart disease throughout Europe and Mexico and Israel and elsewhere that we work with collectively on a regular basis. And coming up in Europe in the middle of this month is uh, Heart Valve Disease Awareness Week, which is separate from what we do in the U.S. But we will certainly, to the extent it's applicable and appropriate, we will be amplifying those messages in the U.S. Even though the U.S. we have our own Valve Disease Day, separate from the European Week. So we work collaboratively with a lot of organizations.
So I'm a little hesitant to touch this because I think that,
Global Heart Hub. I'm sorry. Global Heart Hub is the organization. Is the umbrella organization we work with.
there you go. And we'll make sure that we remind everyone's global heart health. So the thing that jumps out at me, and I'm afraid to sort of touch this right now because we're significantly over time already. As you know, I aim for about 15, 20 minutes. We're at 24 minutes already. But the thing that really jumped out at me is this. By the way, it's a Global Heart Hub. I got that wrong. But here's a nice little blurb for people. One of the things you mentioned you guys do is this idea of providing access to patients for a lot of these groups. So I imagine for medical device companies, like you said, but also for pharma and for anyone else who sort of needs a patient voice, if you will. The question I have is, when you're having these conversations, have you looked, and you talked about clinical trial recruitment, but I do a lot of interviews around blockchain and around these decentralized ledger technologies, and the idea being um, patient advocacy groups um, could use blockchain to not only um, provide access to patients, but get paid for doing that in a way that is transparent, and patients and the patient advocacy groups could benefit from that process. Um, and I talk to technologists, and they're like, "This is going to be amazing. It's going to change the world." On the ground, you're running an organization that is exactly that target group. Do you think that the world is ready for blockchain in patient advocacy, or are we still a few years away?
I would say we're still a few years away. I don't, and I'm certainly not a blockchain expert as much as I've tried to educate myself um, around it. The and I think we have to separate a couple of functions. So I think a blockchain has, I think, is being employed in some areas of clinical research more around the security of the data itself for that trial and the chain of control of that data and the security of that data that is generated from the clinical trial participants. So, blockchain there, I think, is applicable, and that's probably where it's being used now. Although I don't think yet to a great extent, but it certainly is being used. In terms of what we can offer in pure outreach, I don't know if blockchain is necessarily applicable. It's more traditional uh, uh, marketing channels, if you will, social media, email marketing, um, uh, getting the word out that a particular survey is open or a particular clinical trial may be recruiting or something like that. And there's a patient recruitment firm called Antidote that we are partnering with on these recruitment operations because we don't have the back office capacity to screen patients, to connect them to research sites, but we do have the capacity and the credibility to go out and make patients aware of these opportunities. And we're very careful about how we would do that and what we would make available. It's not just an open an open door. Pay us X dollars and we'll do X. I mean, we really have to be comfortable with the research that's being done, with who's doing the research, with whether there's been patient input into the design of the research, et cetera. Um, so I don't think blockchain is applicable on that front end, but I know it is being used on the back end, where obviously the integrity of the data for the clinical trial that hopefully will eventually end up with the FDA is of utmost importance.
So, as you know, we can keep going, and this is just always a fun conversation, but we are well past our timeline. So, as you know, I like to ask a couple of questions. My first question is, based on what we've discussed, what would you like to ask the audience?
What would I like to ask the audience? Um, I would like to ask the audience how they feel about the prospect of Medicare eligibility age being lowered, currently being debated in Congress.
I'm going to give you my personal view, as I always do. I'm a big fan of including as many people as possible into Medicare and the government payment. Not because I think government payers are the greatest in the world, but I think it's important that we provide access to care. We're one of the only developed countries that don't allow that, and I think
Mhm.
that that's concerning. I have a feeling that a lot of people will disagree with me and say that and they should. I mean, that's their right. But I think that it's we already pay a lot of money in insurance, and the ability to cover people would be useful as we continue. Um, but that raises some many thorny issues like How do you cover the cost of care, and what care should be covered, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that'll become conversations we need to have as we continue. The second question: what is something you've learned in the last month?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I learned this for the first time, but it's certainly been reinforced that you, as much as you want to plan for the future and think ahead, um, you need to be adaptable and flexible in that planning. And I guess I did not see. I maybe some some of our infectious disease experts saw this, but I did not see this whipsaw coming in COVID. That we would be actually, in many ways, in a worse position in September 2021, even with the availability of vaccines, than we were in September of 2020. And that that is it's discouraging, but you have to adapt to that reality and move ahead.
Fair point. Last question: what is something that made you happy in the last week? We know it's not gardening or backyard work.
It actually has made me happy. So it's without
Okay.
getting into a lot of detail. We live in a rural area where we don't have a lot of city services. We do have municipal water. We do not have municipal sewer. So the project this week was putting in a new drain field, so a septic tank and many loads of sand
Oh,
and new piping. And we've actually, and this is something else I guess I learned in the last uh, week or so. We actually, largely because of climate change, our water table has gone up, has risen 15 inches here. So we have had to essentially raise our backyard 15 inches, and that's a lot of sand. And so that's what we've been observing this week. So did it make me happy? It makes me happy that we are um, um, preventing some potential future flooding of our property, and making our property more secure. So that is, in some ways makes me happy. It doesn't make me happy to write the check, but it was time. And these things are supposed to last 20 years, and ours lasted 40. So I guess we're okay.
that's pretty good. And as you know, the thing I usually ask is how can people reach you? But I'm going to flash it on the screen. But how can people reach you, John?
Yeah, email is a good way. I'm on Twitter at jlewisdc. We have a Facebook page, Heart Valve US. I believe it is, or if you search Heart Valve Voice US, and there I would caution, because we have Heart Valve Voice in the UK and other Heart Valve Voices. Make sure you're on the US one if you're in the US. Um, those are the best ways to get to us. And then through our website, you can get to our patient community, the My Valve, My Voice community, which at some point may be a standalone site. And we're working through those details now.
Awesome. Thank you again, John. This was wonderful having you on as always. I do hope you'll consider coming back. This was awesome. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.